Now these old mountains, they're isolated. These people lived in these mountains generation after generation. And we had our own way of talking, our own dialect. Now here in the South, there's 5 or 6 different accents of the Southern language. But here in the mountains, we just call it mountain talk. It's just the way we was born and raised. A lot of people don't understand half the words we say. But to hear a fellow Appalachian talk, we know exactly what they're saying. And all across the South, just different accents. But not only accents, they had different phrases and sayings for certain things, the way things would happen. And these carried over, I guess, from the old country. And what I mean by old country, like Scotland, Scots Ireland, Ireland, England, Germany, just anybody come into this country generations and generations ago, and they just mixed with the English language, and they made their own little words and sayings. And I'm going to share with you some of the phrases. There's about 70 little phrases here. I know there's so many different ones. I'm going to share with you some of the little phrases and sayings that we say here in the South. Now, the first page, it might be hard to see if you're watching it on a phone, but I'll try to go through each one of them. And one that sounds kind of weird to y'all you have never heard of, I'll explain it a little bit. So, forgive me for the way it looks. I'll do the best I can with them. Well, the first up here, the first 30, page 1. Don't put the cart before the horse. That means don't get in a hurry and do something before you get something else done. That kind of explains itself. These are just old sayings that the old Southern people always said. Don't count your chickens before they hatch. So, don't add up something till you're sure you got it before you depend on it. Don't buy a pig in a poke. Now this is a funny one, because a lot of people, well, what the world's a poke, Donnie? Well, here's a poke. And what it means by a pig in a poke is you don't buy something unless you check it out. You're just buying it blindly, trusting somebody else. So you want to check out whatever you're buying or purchasing or picking up before you just take it home with you, because you never know what's in that old poke. Now that's a good one. And if it's too good to be true, it usually is. And that stands true all the time. If you always hear some commercial or somebody telling you something and say, well, that sounds so awful great. Well, usually if it's too good to be true, it usually is. Don't believe everything you hear. And that's a snowball's chance in hell. Well, that's somebody saying, well, there ain't no way in the world that'll ever happen. And when hell freezes over, they say, well, that'll never happen. That's just old sayings. He's ornery as an old mule. Well, ornery, that means just mean, aggravated, contrary, ornery. Just an old Southern word. And that strikes me mighty queer. Now, not queer. Let's get this straight. It's not queer, it's queer. That's an old Southern name, an old word for something that's not common. It's odd. It's not commonplace. It's queer. That strikes me mighty queer. That's just an old saying from these mountains, old country people. Now, money don't grow on trees. We've all heard that one. And I weren't born yesterday. We've all heard that one. He's no taller than a knee-high to a grasshopper. That's an old country saying. That's just a little old guy that's not even growed up yet. No bigger than a squirrel. That's usually talking about somebody that's real small. Haven't seen him in a coon's age. Well, you don't hear that term much anymore, but I have heard it. And what a coon's age is, they live to be 3 to 5 years in the wild. So that means the same as saying, I haven't seen you in a few years. Old coon's age. That's an old one. It's raining like a cow pissing on a flat rock. Well, if you're out in the country, you know exactly what that is. I mean, that's some hard rain. If you ever seen a cow doing that on a flat rock, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Or it's raining like pouring piss out of a boot. That's an old saying. And when it rains, it pours. Everybody's heard that one. And he's older than dirt. That's pretty old. Old sayings. What goes around comes around. We've heard that one. Rome wasn't built in a day. That's an old saying. We've heard that one. Don't go beyond your raising. That's an old country saying. However you raised, that's the way you are. And don't put all your eggs in one basket. So don't depend on everything on one thing happening. That you hear that commonly. And that's rougher than a hair on a hog's back. If you ever fool with an old hog, they got some of the roughest hair in the world, like an old war brush. And he's as tall as a Georgia pine. That's an old saying. And old Georgia pines grow tall. And this is just talking about somebody that's a real tall man or a boy. And the bigger they are, the harder they fall. We all heard that one. I trust him about as much as I can throw him. That's an old saying. Or I trust him about as much as a fox in a hen house. That's an old saying. And that old dog won't hunt. That's like, no, that's not going to happen. I'm not going to let that happen. That's just an old saying. That old dog won't hunt. Not that the dog won't hunt, it's just, no, we're not going to put up with that. That dog won't hunt. And the next one is, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So that's an old saying. Well, if you can do it, I can do it too. And teach him from sucking eggs. A lot of people, they like to suck his eggs and stuff. That's an old saying. And they get a hold of a bad egg. They don't do that no more. And that sure is steeper than a cow's face. That's an old saying, how steep a ridge or up a hill is. It's steeper than a cow's face. Or that's rougher than a corn cob. That's an old saying. Old corn cob without the corn on it is rough. And that's as queer as a $2 bill. Queer. That's not queer, it's queer. That's just queer. It's just an old word for weird, strange, uncommon. That's crooked as a dog's hind leg. Well, that's somebody looking at something saying, well, that don't look straight. That's crooked. That's crooked as a dog's hind leg, what I've always heard. It's colder than a well digger's butt. I've heard that old saying. When it rains, the devil's whooping his wife, and it's raining while the sun's out. That's part of an old superstition, but that's what they used to say when it was raining real hard and the sun out bright. The devil's whooping his wife. So that's the first 30. Page 2 of these old phrases. He's faster than a bat out of hell. That's an old saying. He's as slow as molasses in the wintertime. Now, that's pretty slow. That's just an old country saying. And worthless as tits on a boar hog. That's an old country saying. Hey, tits is nothing but worthless on a boar hog, but that's just an old saying. He's living high on the hog. That's an old country saying. Somebody's doing well and they can afford the best parts of the hog. That's what they call them. Living high on the hog. He's living good, eating good. He's not the sharpest pencil in the box. That's just an old saying that somebody's not as sharp as they should be mentally. He's dumber than a box of rocks. I've heard that a lot too, the old country saying. Don't cut your nose off in spite of your face. That means don't stick your foot in the mouth or something, just in a phrase of talking. Just don't cut your nose off in spite of your face. That's just an old country saying. And don't go off half-cocked. That's like the old days. Don't go off mad, basically what that is. and he's a flash in the pan, or that's a flash in the pan. That's just something that happens real quick and it's over with. So like a fad or something, it's just a flash in the pan. It's just here today, gone tomorrow. And that come from an old saying from the old flintlocks when they used powder in the pan to ignite their charge in their old black powder guns. Flash in the pan. That stinks to high heaven. That's an old country saying. That's an old one. That's slicker than snot on a doorknob. There's another old saying. And that's hotter than a warm morning stove. You've been around these old warm morning stoves, it's got to be pretty hot to beat one of them. Better put your ducks all in a row. Well, that's just get your stuff together for whatever you're doing. Get your ducks all in a row. Cold feet, warm heart. That's an old saying. They used to say that about women all the time. Practice what you preach. We all heard that one. Do as I say, not as what I do. We've all heard that one. And he's sorrier than corn. Now corn, that's just an old country word for sorry. Corn ain't worth for nothing. Cream always rises to the top. We've always heard that one. Early birds always get the worm. That's an old saying. There's always a bad apple in every bunch. We've all heard that one. And they used to say here in these old mountains, he's as evil as sin. We don't have to explain that one. Need to walk a mile in their shoes? That's just like you don't judge somebody till you've lived their life some. That's all that is. And they're as ugly as a mud fence. I've heard that one too. That's just an old phrase for saying somebody's ugly. I'm as hungry as a bear. We know that one. You can't fix something that ain't broke. Well, that stands true today. That's an old one. And this one's one that come out of the Bible and an old saying. Red sky in the morning, sailor's warning. Red sky at night, sailor's delight. That's an old one, but it's true to this day. And this is an old one here. As it used to be out cutting brush out in the field and stuff, and they'd worried about poison ivy and stuff. It's leaves of 5, stand and drive. Just a little riddle. And leaves of 3, turn and flee. So, leaves of 5 is not poison ivy. Looks like Virginia creeper like you show right here. And leaves of 3, that's poison ivy. So they just made a little poem for it. Leaves of 5, stand and drive, keep working. Leaves of 3, turn and flee. Get out of there. Don't get out of that poison ivy. That's what that is. And another old saying, don't judge lest ye be judged. That's one out of the Bible, but that holds true in these old mountains. And you're only as good as you worked. That is for sure. That is an old saying. Because back in them days, they didn't do contracts and anything. They done bartering. So you was only as good as your word. You broke that word, you was not worth dealing with again. And you're only as good as your raising. That holds true. That's an old saying. And finally, the last one I got on this list, there's more ways to skin a mule, or more ways to skin a cat. You've heard that old saying. But that's just more ways to get something done or something than just one way. So there you go. There's about 70, and there's probably 70 times 70 more of these old sayings and old phrases. These old people had a saying or a phrase for about anything or anybody, anything going on. So that's how it is in these mountains and across the whole South, these phrases. We just had our own way of talking and our own way of saying things. So when somebody said something, you know exactly what they're talking about. And me, I'm just an old country boy, well, an old country man now, that loves these mountains, and I'll spend the rest of my life in these mountains. But there's just so much history here to yet to be told. So I want to thank you all for watching this. Hope you enjoyed these little phrases. So I want to say, God bless, take care, and I'll see you next time.